Humanity's greatest talent isn't art or science, it's falling for absolute nonsense. For centuries, we've been completely duped by everything from fake moon men and petrified giants to alien autopsies conducted with raspberry jam. This isn't just about small lies. These are 32 historical hoaxes so brazen and brilliant, they fooled experts, rewrote history, and proved that the truth is often just the best story someone made up. 1. The travels of Sir John Mandeville, which materialized in the 14th century, was essentially the medieval version of a viral, completely fabricated travel blog. This supposed Sir John spun tales of trekking to the world's most remote regions, where he allegedly met giants with a single eye, men with the heads of dogs, and lands where precious jewels sprouted from trees. It was a masterpiece of sensationalism. For hundreds of years, this book was treated as a legitimate account of a real journey, cited by academics, and even inspiring figures like Christopher Columbus. The only minor inconvenience: Sir John Mandeville was almost certainly not a real person, and his book was just a magnificent collage of existing myths and pure fantasy, likely penned by a cleric with a runaway imagination. It was the ultimate armchair adventure, proving that even in the Middle Ages, people were suckers for a good story about a place they'd never visit. 2. Allow me to introduce John Keeley, a slick operator from Philadelphia in the late 1800s who claimed to have invented a machine that ran on, for all intents and purposes, pure nonsense. He dubbed it the Keeley motor, supposedly fueled by etheric vibrations, and other bits of scientific-sounding gibberish he plucked from thin air. Investors, who must have been high on that same ether, showered him with money. His demonstrations were nothing short of theatrical genius, with machines buzzing and objects levitating, all without any discernible power source. The secret? His laboratory was an intricate web of hidden tubes, concealed air compressors, and probably a very overworked rodent on a wheel. If anyone asked to inspect the engine, he'd feign outrage, claiming they'd disturb the delicate cosmic balance. After he kicked the bucket, his miracle was exposed as a brilliantly executed, very expensive scam. The only thing Keeley perpetually generated was grade A bull. 3. Let's talk about Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, the world's most famous aquatic enigma. For decades, the most compelling piece of evidence was the 1934 surgeon's photograph, showcasing that legendary long-necked creature rising from the dark water. The image was grainy, evocative, and 100% fake. It was actually staged by a bitter big-game hunter named Marmaduke Wetherell, who was seeking revenge after being publicly humiliated when a previous Nessie footprint he found was identified as belonging to a hippopotamus. Yes, a hippo. He and his pals built their monster using a toy submarine and some modeling clay. A conspirator confessed the truth on his deathbed many years later, but by that point, the Loch Ness Monster was an international celebrity. The photograph, debunked or not, had already cemented the myth in pop culture forever. 4. In the 1970s, the world was mesmerized by the supposed discovery of the Tassidae, a Stone Age tribe found living in complete isolation in the Philippine rainforest. They were depicted as a peaceful people untouched by the modern world, wearing leaves for clothes and using primitive stone tools. Anthropologists were ecstatic. National Geographic featured them on its cover, and it was hailed as finding a living time capsule. There was just one problem. It was all a lie. Years later, when journalists investigated without a government escort, they found the Tassidae members wearing t-shirts and jeans, listening to the radio, and looking decidedly not from the Stone Age. The entire affair was likely staged by a powerful Filipino politician to gain international prestige and possibly to protect the land from logging operations. These noble savages were just local villagers paid to put on a show for the cameras. 5. Imagine it's 1726 in England. A woman by the name of Mary Toft makes a startling announcement. She is giving birth to rabbits, not metaphorically. Actual, furry, nose-twitching rabbits. And the medical experts of the day, instead of questioning her sanity, they eagerly gathered to witness the miracle. One of the king's own surgeons was so convinced that he declared it a marvel of nature. For weeks, Mary became a local celebrity, producing various rabbit parts as if she were a biological magic act. The secret to this bizarre phenomenon? Mary had a little help from a friend who was secretly supplying her with the bunnies, which she had become quite adept at concealing. The entire charade collapsed when a man was caught trying to sneak a tiny rabbit into her room. Mary confessed, the doctor suddenly looked very foolish, and England experienced a moment of collective embarrassment. 6. Picture the scene. It's 1817 in a quiet English village. A bewilderingly dressed woman appears, speaking a language nobody can recognize. She claims to be Princess Caribou, a royal from the mysterious and completely fictional island of Javasu, who was captured by pirates and escaped. The local gentry, likely dying of boredom, completely fell for it. They treated her like visiting royalty, providing her with fine clothes and hanging on her every unintelligible word. For a short time, she was the toast of the town, an exotic puzzle everyone wanted to solve. But then came the plot twist. A woman who knew her from her previous life recognized her as Mary Wilcox, the daughter of a simple cobbler with a wild imagination and a gift for performance. She had invented the entire identity, language included. But instead of being shamed, she became an even bigger celebrity for her sheer audacity. 7. During the 1970s, a massive collection of strange clay figurines was reportedly unearthed in Acámbaro, Mexico. These weren't just any old pots. They depicted humans casually riding on the backs of dinosaurs, like some kind of prehistoric cavalry. This was a dream come true for creationists, who immediately declared it as definitive proof that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. Scientists, on the other hand, took one look and basically said, "Are you kidding me?" The figurines were glaringly modern fakes, showing clear signs of recent manufacturing and looking more like a school pottery project than ancient artifacts. Despite being thoroughly debunked, these dino-riding statues became a staple of fringe theories, proving that some people will believe anything if it looks like a scene from the Flintstones. 8. The infamous Hitler Diaries. In 1983, the German magazine Stern announced a monumental discovery: 60 volumes of Adolf Hitler's secret personal journals. The world was stunned. The magazine had paid millions for what they believed were the Führer's private thoughts, his daily musings, and maybe even some angry doodles. Historians were buzzing, and it was hailed as the greatest historical find of the 20th century. That is, until the experts actually got a good look at them. They quickly determined the paper was manufactured after World War II. The ink was modern, and Hitler's signature was a clumsy forgery. The diaries were the handiwork of a master con artist named Konrad Kujau, a man with a talent for faking Nazi memorabilia. The editors at Stern were left with a massive bill and one of the most embarrassing journalistic faceplants in history. 9. In 1869 New York, some workers digging a well struck something hard. It wasn't a rock. It was a 10-foot-tall, petrified man. The Cardiff giant was discovered, and America promptly lost its collective mind. People saw it as proof of biblical giants or maybe an ancestor of Bigfoot. The farm's owner, a fella named Stub Newell, immediately capitalized on the frenzy, turning his property into a must-see attraction and charging admission. Even the master of spectacle, P.T. Barnum, desperately wanted in on the action. The twist? The giant was just a massive block of gypsum, expertly carved and aged with acid by a con artist named George Hull. His goal was to mock religious fundamentalists and make a boatload of cash. The statue itself was comically bad, but thousands of people eagerly paid to see the very, very dumb rock. 10. The 1990s were a golden age for UFO believers, largely thanks to the alien autopsy footage that took the world by storm. This grainy black-and-white film purported to be classified military footage from the Roswell crash, showing medical personnel dissecting a dead extraterrestrial. It was shocking, it was graphic, and it was completely bogus. The alien was just a latex dummy filled with sheep brains and raspberry jam, sourced from a local butcher. The film's promoter, Ray Santilli, made a fortune off the stunt before eventually admitting it was merely a reconstruction of supposed original footage that was too damaged to show. The special effects artist who built the creature even came forward to detail his work. But for many, the image of that fake alien autopsy became undeniable proof that the truth was out there. 11. Operation Mincemeat, a deception orchestrated by British intelligence during World War II, was a hoax so daring and macabre it feels ripped from the pages of a spy thriller. The Allies needed to trick the Nazis into thinking they were invading Greece, not Sicily. Their solution was ingenious. They acquired a dead body, dressed it as a Royal Marine officer, and gave him the identity of Major William Martin. They then chained a briefcase full of meticulously crafted fake invasion plans to his wrist and set the body adrift off the coast of Spain, knowing it would be found by German sympathizers. They even planted fake love letters and ticket stubs in his pockets to make his identity convincing. The Nazis swallowed the bait completely, redeploying their forces and leaving Sicily vulnerable. It was a morbid masterpiece that literally changed the course of the war. 12. In the 1930s, a man named Howard Horn claimed to have unearthed an incredible collection of historical records in Pennsylvania, which came to be known as the Horn Papers. These documents, including diaries and maps, offered a supposedly unprecedented look into the region's early colonial history. Historians were initially overjoyed, believing it to be a treasure trove of new information. But it was all too good to be true. Horn, a man with a flair for storytelling, had forged the entire collection himself. He even claimed that a vivid dream had conveniently shown him exactly where the lead box containing the papers was buried. It took experts years to systematically prove the documents were filled with historical errors and anachronisms. Despite the evidence, Horn maintained his innocence to the end, insisting he was just the messenger. 13. Here's a modern classic that proves we're just as gullible as ever: the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. In 1998, a very official-looking website went live, documenting this rare and endangered species, an amphibious octopus that supposedly lived in the rainforests of Washington state, elegantly swinging from branches. The site was complete with photos, obvious fakes, detailed biological information, and pleas for conservation efforts. The entire thing was created as an experiment in online literacy. The result? People believed it, passionately. Educators reported students citing the website in their research papers and writing heartfelt letters to save the fictional creature. It remains a perfect example of how easily misinformation can spread online, especially when the lie is as wonderfully weird as an octopus living in a tree. 14. Let's travel back to 1835, when the New York Sun newspaper decided that factual reporting was overrated. In a series of articles, they claimed that the renowned astronomer Sir John Herschel had built a super telescope and discovered life on the moon. We're not talking about simple bacteria. The paper described in stunning detail herds of lunar unicorns, humanoid bat creatures that flew around crystal temples, and industrious beavers who lived in huts. The articles were presented as serious scientific reporting, and the public devoured it. The newspaper's circulation exploded. Rival publications, desperate to keep up, even began reprinting the absurd stories. Meanwhile, the real John Herschel, quietly observing stars in South Africa, had no idea he'd become the world's leading expert on moonbats. The Sun never really apologized, having already won the 19th century's gold medal for fake news. 15. In 1844, the master of Gothic horror, Edgar Allan Poe, decided to apply his fiction skills to the news. He penned an article for the New York Sun that was presented as a breaking news exclusive. It detailed the astonishing transatlantic crossing of a new steerable balloon, the Victoria, which had supposedly traveled from Europe to America in a mere 3 days. Poe's account was packed with convincing but entirely made-up technical specifications and a dramatic hour-by-hour log of the journey. The city of New York went into a frenzy, celebrating the incredible technological leap. A few days later, the paper had to print a retraction, admitting the entire story was a work of fiction by Poe. It was a brilliant piece of trolling, proving that Poe was a pioneer of viral fake news long before the internet even existed. 16. In 1917 England, two young cousins, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, decided to prove that fairies were real. Their evidence? A series of photographs showing them playing with tiny winged sprites in their garden. These Cottingley fairies looked suspiciously like paper cutouts from a picture book, held up with pins, but the world was desperate to believe. Their biggest and most influential fan was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the hyper-rational detective Sherlock Holmes. Doyle became their public champion, writing articles and books defending the photos' authenticity. For decades, the pictures were debated as genuine proof of the supernatural. It wasn't until the cousins were elderly women that they finally admitted it was all a prank with cardboard and hat pins. It just goes to show that even the most logical minds can be fooled if they want to believe badly enough. 17. Let's talk about the English Mercury. For a long time, this was celebrated as the very first English newspaper, supposedly printed in 1588 with the breaking news of the Spanish Armada's defeat. It was a cornerstone of journalistic history, cited by scholars and proudly mentioned in textbooks. The only problem? It was a complete and utter fabrication. The newspaper was actually an elaborate prank cooked up in the 18th century by a historian and his friends, likely as a joke to fool their stuffy academic peers. They painstakingly designed it to look authentic, but eventually, someone noticed the paper and typeface were suspiciously modern for the 16th century. So, the celebrated birth of the English newspaper was really just a piece of high-effort, intellectual trolling from a couple hundred years ago. 18. In 1810, a professional prankster named Theodore Hook, a man who clearly had too much free time, made a bet that he could turn any random house in London into the most famous address in the city within 24 hours. He chose 54 Berners Street. His method was simple: mass chaos. Hook sent out thousands of forged letters requesting all manner of goods and services to be delivered to the house at the same time. This included dozens of pianos, tons of coal, an army of chimney sweeps, countless wedding cakes, and even the Lord Mayor of London. The street descended into absolute gridlock and pandemonium for hours. And Hook? He watched the beautiful mess he created from a rented room across the street, laughing himself sick. He won his bet and a permanent place in the Prankster Hall of Fame. 19. Professor Johann Beringer was an 18th-century German academic who was passionate about collecting fossils. A little too passionate, perhaps. He began discovering a series of incredible figured stones, which he called Lügenstein, or lying stones. These weren't your typical fossils. They were stones with images of birds, spiders, and even comets and Hebrew letters carved into them. Beringer was overjoyed, believing he was about to revolutionize science, and he quickly published a book detailing his finds. The cruel twist? The stones were fakes, carved and planted by his own jealous colleagues specifically to humiliate him. They even carved Beringer's own name into one of the stones as a final insult. He eventually discovered the hoax and reportedly spent the rest of his life and fortune trying to buy back every copy of his own book. 20. In 1912, a fossil hunter named Charles Dawson announced a monumental discovery in Piltdown, England, the skull of an early human, the so-called missing link. It had the perfect combination of a human-like cranium and an ape-like jaw, seemingly proving that humanity had evolved in Britain. For over 40 years, the Piltdown Man was a celebrated star of human evolution, featured in museums and textbooks worldwide. There was just one tiny little issue. It was a complete fraud. Someone had taken a medieval human skull, attached it to the jaw of an orangutan, filed down the teeth to look more human, and stained the whole thing to make it look ancient. It wasn't until 1953 that scientific testing finally exposed the elaborate fake, proving that for decades, the scientific community had been duped by a clever ape jaw. 21. For most of the 20th century, a woman known as Anna Anderson held the world spellbound with her claim to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of Russia's last Tsar, who she said had survived the family's execution. She was incredibly convincing to many, sparking a romantic hope that a piece of the old empire had survived. She initiated decades of legal battles to be officially recognized and to claim a share of the Romanov fortune. It was a global sensation. However, the advent of DNA testing in the 1990s finally put the matter to rest. The results proved she had no relation to the Romanovs and was almost certainly a Polish factory worker named Franziska Szankowska. For over 60 years, she maintained one of the most successful imposter acts in history. 22. In 1910, a group of clever and mischievous friends, which included the future literary icon Virginia Woolf, decided to pull a prank on the Royal Navy. This became known as the Dreadnought Hoax. Disguising themselves with elaborate costumes and makeup, they posed as the Emperor of Abyssinia and his royal entourage. The Navy completely fell for it. They gave the fake royals a full honors welcome and an exclusive tour of their most powerful battleship, the HMS Dreadnought. The Abyssinians communicated in a gibberish language, famously shouting "Bunga Bunga" at the astonished officers, who simply assumed it was a foreign custom. When the press revealed the hoax, the Navy was deeply embarrassed, and the pranksters became folk heroes for so brilliantly exposing the pomp and circumstance of the establishment. 23. Enter P.T. Barnum, the undisputed king of the 19th century hoax. In the 1840s, he presented one of his most famous attractions, the Fiji mermaid. This was not the beautiful creature of myth. Instead, it was the grotesque upper body of a monkey sewn onto the tail of a large fish, then dried and mummified into something truly hideous. Barnum advertised it as a genuine mythological creature, and the public, ever eager for a spectacle, flocked to see it. While some were horrified by the obvious fake, many were captivated by the sheer strangeness of it all. The Fiji mermaid became a massive success, a testament to Barnum's genius for turning a grotesque fraud into a profitable sensation and proving that people will pay to see just about anything. 24. On the night of October 30th, 1938, Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater Company broadcast a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds. They cleverly formatted the show as a series of realistic breaking news reports interrupting a regular music program. For anyone who tuned in late and missed the introduction, it sounded terrifyingly real. The broadcast described a Martian invasion underway in New Jersey, complete with terrifying heat rays and military defeats. A wave of panic swept across parts of the country, with people reportedly fleeing their homes and flooding emergency phone lines. While the scale of the mass panic was likely sensationalized by newspapers, the event undeniably proved the immense power of the new medium of radio to blur the line between fiction and reality, causing a nationwide scare with nothing but voices and sound effects. 25. Meet Friederike Hofe, better known as the Seeress of Prevorst. In 19th century Germany, this bedridden woman became a paranormal superstar. She claimed to have a direct line to the spirit world, able to predict the future, diagnose illnesses by staring into people's souls, and even speak a unique inner language of strange symbols. Her bedroom became a hotspot for intellectuals, doctors, and mystics, all eager to witness her supernatural trances and cryptic visions. Was she a genuine psychic or a highly creative and possibly ill woman with a talent for performance? Skeptics today point to a combination of her genuine illness, the power of suggestion, and a flair for the dramatic. She was, in essence, the 19th century's most convincing spiritual influencer. 26. For hundreds of years, the Donation of Constantine was one of the most important documents in European history. It was a decree, supposedly from the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, that granted the Pope and the Catholic Church sweeping political authority over Western Europe. Whenever a king or emperor challenged the Church's power, this document was the ultimate rebuttal. The problem? It was a complete and utter forgery. Centuries later, scholars analyzed the text and realized the Latin used was from the 8th century, not the 4th. It was the historical equivalent of finding a document from ancient Rome that mentions Wi-Fi. The document was clearly created much later to retroactively justify papal power. When it was exposed, the church was in a very awkward position. 27. P.T. Barnum, the master showman, had one of his first massive hits in 1835 with Joyce Heth. Barnum presented her to the public as the 161-year-old former nurse of none other than George Washington himself. He exhibited the elderly, blind, and mostly immobile African-American woman who would share her, completely fabricated, stories about raising little George. The public was fascinated. Was she really that old? Of course not. After she died, Barnum, ever the opportunist, held a public autopsy which revealed she was probably around 80 years old. But Barnum was a genius at spinning a narrative. He simply claimed that he too had been duped, adding another layer to the spectacle. It was a masterclass in public manipulation and a clear sign of the sensational entertainment to come. 28. For years, the phenomenon of crop circles appearing overnight in the English countryside was a source of endless speculation. These massive, intricate patterns in fields of grain baffled the public and fueled countless theories about alien visitors, secret military technology, or unknown natural forces. The mystery was a global sensation. Then, in 1991, two friends named Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley came forward and confessed. They had been creating the circles since the 1970s as a prank, using nothing more than wooden planks, rope, and a bit of clever geometry. The paranormal community was devastated, but Doug and Dave had pulled off one of the most successful and long-running hoaxes in modern history, all because they were a bit bored and wanted to have some fun. 29. William Henry Ireland was an ambitious young man in the 1790s who desperately wanted to make his mark on the literary world. His method? He began discovering a treasure trove of lost documents written by William Shakespeare, including letters and even a brand new, never-before-seen play. London's literary elite was ecstatic, and experts eagerly authenticated the finds. The newly discovered play was even rushed into production. There was just one problem. It was laughably bad. During the premiere, the audience found the writing so awful that they burst into laughter, and the performance had to be stopped. Ireland was exposed as a forger. For a brief shining moment, however, a teenager had successfully convinced the world that he had found new works by the greatest writer in English history. 30. The Amityville Horror is one of the most famous haunting stories of all time. In 1975, the Lutz family bought a house in Amityville, New York, where a grisly mass murder had taken place a year earlier. They fled in terror after just 28 days, claiming they were tormented by demonic forces, including green slime on the walls and a demonic pig-like creature. Their story became a best-selling book and a hugely successful horror movie. The truth, however, was far less supernatural. Later investigations and court cases revealed that the Lutzes, likely with their lawyer, had invented or wildly exaggerated most of the paranormal events for financial gain. The story was a brilliant piece of marketing that turned a tragic crime into a multi-million-dollar horror franchise built on a foundation of lies. 31. In the early 1970s, a novelist named Clifford Irving pulled off one of the most audacious literary hoaxes ever. He convinced a major publisher that he was secretly collaborating with the incredibly reclusive billionaire, Howard Hughes, on his official autobiography. Irving was so convincing, forging letters and mimicking Hughes's eccentricities, that the publisher gave him a massive advance. The book was set to be a global sensation. The entire scheme came crashing down when the real Howard Hughes, who had been in complete seclusion for years, emerged just long enough to hold a press conference via telephone to state that he had never met or spoken to Clifford Irving in his life. Irving's bold con landed him in prison, but not before he gave the world a masterclass in faking it till you make it. 32. In 1896, the world-renowned Louvre Museum in Paris made a spectacular acquisition, a solid gold tiara said to have belonged to an ancient Scythian king named Cytopharnes. It was a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship and quickly became one of the museum's prized possessions. For years, it was admired by millions as a priceless artifact. But then doubts began to emerge among experts who noticed some suspiciously modern tool marks on the gold. The truth finally came out when a humble goldsmith from Odessa, Israel Ruchamovsky, came forward and admitted that he had made the tiara as a commission. The Louvre, one of the greatest museums in the world, had been duped into buying a brilliant but very modern fake. The embarrassment must have been monumental. So, from fake giants to forged diaries, the art of the con is clearly timeless. But 32 is just a number, and we know history is an ocean of lies. We've laid out our case, but now it's your turn. What monumental, jaw-dropping hoax did we foolishly leave off this list? We want to see the one that makes us look like amateurs. Settle it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this masterclass in deception, prove you're the real deal by hitting like and subscribe.